It was back in 1970. No, it was either 1969 or 68. I was with the National Theater of the Deaf, NTD, and we were going on tour, and there were a few people that came in from New York City to Connecticut, which is where we were based out of. And there were 3 people that came, and we didn't really know what they were doing. It was during rehearsals. We were prepping for a road tour, and we didn't know who they were or what they were about, but the director of NTD came and said that there's a new TV show coming out on PBS, and they said the name, and we didn't know much about it. And, they said that they wanted a deaf actor using ASL involved in their show. And I thought, oh, that's cool. But I didn't realize at the time that that was really my audition and that's what they were there for. It wasn't just me. They were scouting, really. They were looking at all of the ladies that were kind of the same age. We all looked a bit different. But anyway, they were there, and ends up after they had observed that day, I got an email. Well, I didn't get an email. We didn't have email back then. Somebody informed me that they had chosen me as the actor to be the representative from NTD on their television show. And it was a children's show. And at that time, we had a very small theater, and we went and worked with the kids on Sesame Street. And that's really what started my career as becoming the deaf librarian. And it just led from one thing to another. And I went from 1970 or 72. And then I started to really reduce my time with NTD and start exploring what it would look like to work a little bit more with that, that program, and really kind of expose what sign language looks like. And I started doing a lot more time with Sesame Street. I became full-time cast member with them, and I was there for 32 years. Just to give a little background on the first question, I didn't start as an actor, and it was really hard for the kids to grab this concept of an actor earning money. They thought it was something that they did for fun, but it's a profession, right, where people get paid. People come to see your work on stage, and they pay for that. And so, I think it was really good being in that environment, and we decided that I would become the librarian because my background at Gallaudet University and my degree was library science, and I wanted to make the most of that education that I had had, and I know what to do in the library, and I knew exactly what a librarian would look like, and it was a good thing. So I was running the library and showing that a deaf person can run a library with multiple assistants, and that's what it would look like, right? And there was the communication aspect of it when people would come in and they would see how to communicate with me. And at the same time, I was able to tell stories in ASL. And it was just a really great experience. But back to your question that you had about deaf women and the combination of that, and how that worked with what I was doing and how it fit with what I was doing. At the time, I wasn't really focused on my role as a woman. It was more so the exposure to ASL within Sesame Street as a librarian, because that was my communication. I did not use speech to communicate. And the director of Sesame Street got several letters from different oral organizations, which I don't know who they are specifically, saying that I wasn't using my speech at all. And I thought, well, ASL is my language. And I was really young at the time, and when that came to me, I thought, I didn't have mentors. There were just a few of us that were even in showbiz at the time, and I thought, well, what do I do with this? But you know what? I pointed back to the character and what the character's mode of communication was. And I said that Linda the librarian is going to communicate in ASL. That's her language. And I used my voice to say hello or how are you to show that vocalization within a deaf individual is completely normal, and they can get used to the idea that deaf people have a voice box, that they can use their voice to show a range of emotion, to show happiness and disappointment, and that's okay. And the people at Sesame Street, they just took it head on. And when I got the information and the approval for them, I thought, oh, this is awesome. This is going to be in my native language. And then adding the female aspect on top of it was like a double whammy. But they were so open. They really encouraged diversity. There was no multicultural word or movement. They couldn't quite see into the future of how that was going to look, but diversity was important to them. They wanted to reach people in the inner city, to the children that didn't have access to information, to education. This was free PBS on free television. They were giving information for free to inner city children so that they could learn. And that helped me in knowing how open-minded they were to people of color and to people with disabilities too. It was really smart of Sesame Street and the original team to be that open-minded, because it allowed them with that attitude of diversity to reach so many people and still be operating to this day. That's why they've been so successful. So, the being a woman and being deaf on top of that was really important to me. It was. My identity is deaf first and female second, and it's because of the language. I cherish my language. But being a deaf woman, in the 70s, there was a huge feminist movement. And being able to identify as a woman was important, but I identified as a deaf woman. It was part of my family. It's part of my pride. I had deaf parents. ASL was my language. It's who I was. And going into Sesame Street in the 70s, like Niall DeMarco says, if you have a strong identity of who you are, it starts with your family and goes from there, you have confidence. So adding in this feminine aspect gave me a huge foundation on top of my strong cultural identity as a deaf individual. That really pushed me through all of the years. I mean, imagine there was no technology. Can you imagine what that was like? Yeah, I did. I had barriers as a deaf woman on the show, but thank God that they were so open-minded. There were a few programs at the time, and they provided captioning. They offered me interpreters every time I came to the show. I had access to communicate with everyone on the set, in the makeup room, when we would go in anywhere behind the scenes. It really was an important asset to the show for me to be able to have communication, and they gave that to me. I do want to talk a little bit about what it was like with the writers and them not meeting a deaf person before, because when I read through the script, I realized that it just didn't suit me. It was a show based on puppets, and as a deaf person, I did not feel right about what that looked like as a deaf person. I didn't want to give the wrong impressions to people that were watching, people in school districts, parents, children, psychologists, professionals, about what a deaf person looked like. I wanted to show that a deaf person's identity is rooted in their language, in American Sign Language. And so that barrier that was left was just trying to figure out how to address the writers. See, every year they had a hiatus for several months. The writers would get together and they would write the script for the following year, for that next season. And so I asked the producer if it would be okay for me to go to New York and sit down and meet with them, to meet with the writers and take that as an opportunity. And they were totally willing to do it. So I went and I talked to them about my culture, about the deaf way. I talked to them about what my day looks like, how I answer the door, how I know that the phone's ringing, how we used a TTY. I talk to them about what a typical day looks like for a deaf person to really start breaking down these ideas in their mind that deaf people can't do things and change it to a positive thought process. It became a real exchange of information over time that developed into a beautiful collaboration. At one point, I sat down with the head director and they got some research-based information and figured out how they were going to include what I gave them about my life as a deaf individual for my character. And I wanted them to know anybody that came onto Sesame Street, maybe other people that I would be meeting, other famous individuals that would come. I wanted them to know that they made sure that I was shown as a deaf individual with the language that I had, and truly it was the most beautiful experience. And removing those barriers, after that, things went so smoothly. It got to the point to where the producer's assistants were just calling for interpreters as they needed them. They had the phone numbers and they would call them and get them set up and squared away so they could meet with me. I could focus on my work as a deaf actor. I was an actress and only wearing that one hat. They were absolutely wonderful to me. I continued working until 2002, and that's when I decided to move on into another part of my life and reach some of the other goals that I had been waiting to accomplish. But I didn't really know at the time what the impact had been, but I did learn that after being on the show for 2 generations of children that had grown up watching the television show, that not just the deaf woman aspect, but also so many hearing individuals and children that had grown up watching the show. But then those deaf kids that grew up and they could see a deaf person on TV and tell their hearing parents that someone's signing on television. And I know that, maybe they couldn't read the captions, but seeing access to English and sign language at the same time, I didn't really realize the impact that was going to have on them. And then seeing that it's a woman and being able to identify with that and feel excited about sign language, yeah, what an incredible impact that was. After those generations of children grew up, they would come to me and they would tell me thank you. There were a lot of hearing women that would come to me and say, I became an interpreter because of you. And I became a teacher of the deaf because of you. And all of these people would come up to me and tell me their stories. And was it ever rewarding and humbling to see that happen? What I'd like to see deaf women accomplish moving forward would be a sense of self-esteem. I want them to love themselves and to be confident. And today, it seems a bit easier for women and for deaf women to go about their lives and not face this negative attitude of people being afraid of what's wrong with them because they're signing with their hands. It seems as though people are excited to sign back and say hi, and they're thrilled. So really, I think we need to just keep working. I think that we need to show that we're equal to our male counterparts, that we are able to rise through the ranks in our job positions and have equal pay, that we're just as smart as men, and that there's no difference. We are human beings, and we should be seen that way. We do still have a long way to go and a lot of work to do. We need to push the boundaries so that we're seen as equivalent. The advice that I would give for future deaf women would be, it's so important for you to think about the intrinsic motivation and the passion that you have And if you have that desire, to go for it. You have to be responsible to chase your dreams. If you want to become a doctor, a lawyer, or a producer for a TV show, or even own your own business, you've got to dig in and learn the skills necessary to make it happen. The hard skills, the soft skills, go for it. You're going to have to work hard, harder than your hearing female counterparts, and the men too, but you can do that. Believe in yourself, have a strong foundation, and go for it. Most of all, be resourceful.